Our first panel of this year's summit will highlight cultivating the future and how AI is being used for Agtech in the Northeast. Katie Gold, the Susan Eckert Lynch Assistant Professor of Grape Pathology and Extension Specialist at Cornell Agritech, will moderate the panel. Katie will be joined by Yu Zhang, Assistant Professor of Horticulture with the School of Integrated Plant Science at Cornell Agritech. Gloire Rubambiza, Research Scientist for IBM Research, and Alyssa Whitcraft, the Executive Director for NASA Acres. So it's all very exciting. Let's welcome them to the stage.
Hi, friends. Thanks for joining us here today. I'm excited to be the first panel to kick things off. I was really grateful to Grow New York for offering me this opportunity to gather a group of my favorite people to talk to you all about something we all find very exciting and we're all very passionate about in today's landscape. So we all are here today because we believe that Agtech is a critical part of the food system sustainability ecosystem. We all believe as well that AI has the potential to be a transformative technology, and we want all the Agtech startups here to succeed in this sphere, and especially here in the great state of New York, of course, in the Grow New York region. And what we'd like to do today, though, is to talk about the underlying principle that we all believe is truly the most important and foundational for success in this space. And I'll just kind of cut to the chase that the thesis statement of this panel is that we ultimately believe that co-development is that critical factor that will differentiate success from failure. At the end of the day, many of us, we have great ideas every day, right? But we're not necessarily the first people to have those great ideas, but we all want to be the first people to succeed in seeing those great ideas translate into reality. So today, I'm gonna pass it and ask my friends here to introduce themselves, to tell me their story, and tell me and tell us what co-development means to you. So Gloire, would you take it away?
Of course, thank you. Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Gloire Rubambiza, research scientist at IBM Research, Cornell alum. I just graduated last year. And to give a little bit of background about myself, when I was finishing undergrad in computer science, I realized that there was something missing to my computer science degree. It was like computer science plus X. And to me, that X was just applying to something that matters to people. So when I decided to join Cornell, it was because Cornell had a sort of bold idea in 2017 about this Institute for Digital Agriculture, or CIDA. And I felt like that was something that was nascent and I could lead. And it brought together two things that I care about, which is computer systems and human-centered design. So that was what brought me to Cornell, and then turned into a great collaboration with Katie throughout my PhD. And being here, to me, what co-development means, I come from a background of computer science and human-computer interaction. And there, what we understand co-development is sort of like co-design and participatory design. And it came from this idea in the late 90s when new technologies were being introduced to factory workers in like Scandinavia, but people were resisting those technologies. That's because people did not know how it would affect their day-to-day jobs. So they resisted because no one bothered to talk to them how they would be able to work with the technology. And that's where, to me, it means being able to talk to the people that you want to build the technology with and building it alongside them so that it's more helpful than detrimental to their day-to-day jobs. That's to be what it means, and I'm excited to be talking more about it here and how it could help with the Agtech adoption.
Great.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Alyssa Whitcraft. Formerly, I'm a research professor at the University of Maryland, but the hat that I'm wearing today is I'm the executive director of NASA Acres, which is NASA's US-focused ag program. And everyone on this stage, our partners, Katie is the lead for Cornell and pest and disease lead for that program. So the first question people always have is like, so growing lettuce in space, or sending the potatoes to the moon, things like that, or to Mars, I guess. And no, actually the planet that NASA studies the most is actually Earth. And so we launch satellites that look back at Earth and tell us about things that are happening here. And so I come from, my family background is in winemaking. I'm from Southern California. I always wanted to do something related to food. I went to UCLA as an undergrad, and I was very into this sort of dual degree that I had that was part technical and part social science. And I continued in my PhD on more of the technical route. But I think the reason that I've been able to be sort of successful and impactful in my career is tying the human piece together, like not letting the human factor fail to be a factor at all in the work that we do. NASA has no shortage of innovation and exciting activities, but why is it that so many farmers, we did a survey and 70% of them had little to no knowledge whatsoever that NASA worked in agriculture. And yet we publish tons of papers and do lots of innovation and underpin the weather forecasts and do the USDA forecasting reports for what's happening with crops around the world. And I think the key issue that we've had is that we don't reach the people who need to adopt the data often where they are. So NASA Acres started 2 years ago. It's an applied sciences program, which is basically a way of saying that we're taking the science and putting it to work. And the only way that I've ever seen this work, I started first working with sort of international ministries of agriculture. Turning it back home is you have to start with a conversation with the people who you're hoping to support in their decision making with the use of satellite data. So co-development for me, it's almost becoming, in the academic world at least, a little bit of a trite phrase, but it is very, very much the core of what we do. It's iterative. It's not like listening and only going, okay, sure, I'll do that, and then leaving for the day. It's touching base repeatedly in a high-touch relationship to get to the end of it. And there has to be really clear rules of engagement, rules of play about what people's roles are in the process from the beginning, and checking in with one another regularly about how it's going, sort of like any relationship. So anyway, that's enough from me. Pass it over to you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Yu Jiang, assistant professor. So by training, I'm also a roboticist and also another computer engineer here. And what really turned my career pathway is, at some point in my graduate school, and I realized I can make a small IoT sensor to control and read the oxygen, level inside the water, so that we can better control the oxygen, level inside a pond that can increase the aquaculture productivity. And that saves the growers, life, because otherwise, regardless of the weather, regardless of the time, the grower always needs to just woke up and then just go to the pond and turn on that valve to inject the oxygen. And by that time, as a kind of a younger kid, right, I started to cultivate the passion. It's not about I create something for technology. It's more like I create a technology that can really benefit other people and especially improve their life. And that just turned my kind of a whole career into why not just innovate new technologies dedicated for agriculture and food systems. And that's where now my lab focuses on systems engineering approach, try to innovate advanced sensing technologies, try to innovate AI-based data analytics tools, and also robots that can solve many of the challenges facing to US agriculture systems. And especially with the current labor shortage and also the projection, right? Labor always been the #1 challenge for many of the growers, and we hope the robots can be the answer there. And also at the same time, instead of doing the research, we are also doing workforce development. And my passion is how we can train and attract younger generations, especially with the tech background, back to agriculture, back to food, which is the most essential sector for human society. Yeah, Katie, back to you.
Oh, thank you guys. I'm so excited. Thank you all again for agreeing to join my panel. So let's just get right into it then. So thinking about co-development, how it's so important for AI, why don't we start first with some examples from the front, right? So Gloria, would you mind just getting us started? Tell me about a time when pursuing co-development and engaging in this changed your plan.
Yeah, of course. So around 2020, I started collaborating with Katie and her former student and my really good friend, Fernando. And we built a system that used machine learning-based prediction of leaf roll disease, like in grapevines. And we're using satellite imagery from NASA to help us with that. And we came up with a paper, and great results overall. But then we're like, OK, what's the next version of the system going to look like? How can we scale it? Because I'm a distributed systems person. How can we scale it to multiple farms? So as a sort of co-development advocate, I was like, let's go and talk to growers in Southern California and also Northern California, to get a sense of what is their perspective on what are the most important problems they want us to solve. I went in with this idea, understanding that water stress is an issue that they want to deal with. Like that's something that I would like to solve for. But in the sense of usually computer science tends to be a hammer looking for a nail, I was quickly humbled that for some growers, their biggest issue is not even water stress, it's labor, like you just mentioned. And to me, that stopped me halfway, and I had to be like, I have to rethink my plans. That's because I was being able to have those conversations with the growers, and that shifted my perspective and how I was thinking about developing technologies for them. So I think that's the way that I like to think of an early example for it, yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like the end product was ultimately stronger for that shift that you made?
Yeah, I think so by virtue of integrating the human insights into the system design eventually, shifted how we even thought about the abstractions for computer science and how we can be able to build something that applies to multiple contexts and serve multiple stakeholders. Ultimately, that's what would determine success. Otherwise, we'd just be building something for one stakeholder that may not be able to scale.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have a lot to share, Katie.
Take it away.
So by the way, so Katie and I work very closely because we joined the university almost at the same time to start our independent career. And that's actually, in my opinion, one of the best examples, to show interdisciplinary research. Like, what does that mean? It's no longer being just a plant pathologist, working on something, or a roboticist working on something. It's like on day one, we just discuss all the ideas and think about the solutions throughout the food chain for agriculture, from research to production. And one of the example, is actually very simple for many of you as a technologists. Is to get the map of a disease severity, okay? As a kind of a researcher, I can develop a lot of fancy algorithms. I can quantify into 0.0001 precision about the percentage of the disease severity for the crops. But then at the end of the day, when I demonstrate that values to many of the growers, they said, can you just let me set 2 thresholds? So I can turn your fancy map with all these numeric values into 3 colors that I can go to the field and just do decision. I think that's what I want. So that totally blew my mind. Yes, from the research part, we are thinking totally different world. But if we bring people early on into this whole co-development process, then we understand each other. Well, we're gonna advance our own field, but also we will guarantee at the end of the day, the product it will be useful for the end users.
Yeah, not just another fancy whiz-bang doodad on the shelf. Exactly. Alyssa, do you have some thoughts here as well?
Well, I have many thoughts actually, but no, no. But I'll just comment. I think Laura's case is really interesting because ultimately in California, like water is an enormous issue, right? But you can't even start to work on the problem of irrigation and the problem of water availability if you don't have the folks in place to sort of, do the work, turn the nozzles on or whatever, harvest, labor-intensive crops. And so the reason I say that is because, yes, you need to start with what the core problem is and say you address that problem. Then by being in continued conversation, you can develop the next problem because you've shown that you show up, you've shown that you're active in the relationship, you've shown that you can deliver results, you've shown quality, and now you can start to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak, of problems.
Yeah. Love it, yeah. And what I hear throughout there is this idea of the trust, right? So the trust being so important, but also too, in those conversations, that there was trust with the stakeholders sharing their true problem. And I think that's also very responsive as well, right? An important part of the process, especially when things are moving so fast. Things are moving fast these days, especially in AI. Gloria, I remember you shared with me when you first interned with IBM, right? There was no ChatGPT.
Yeah, that was 3 years ago. My second internship with IBM Research, it was the world before ChatGPT and large language models, which have changed the world.
Yeah, now what you doing every day at IBM?
Now that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm just trying to make your ChatGPT queries slightly faster.
Exactly. Yeah. So with that, so co-development sounds good. You go on these visits, right? You guys had a good time. I saw the pictures. Going and talking to all these folks, talking to people. Doesn't that take time? Is that something that can still be done in a fast-paced space such as AI? Alyssa, do you want to take that
Yeah,
one?
I mean, and I know that this is like largely a business symposium, right? So coming from the perspective of academia and the perspective of research, which doesn't have the demand to return profit, on a quick basis, right? It can sound really good and pie in the sky that we talk about taking your time and building relationships, but there's a reason why we see so many of these agri-technology companies kind of go bust because it's not that they don't have amazing ideas. It's not that the product isn't good. It's that the people who might want to adopt it are not engaged in the process. So I think all human beings are very relationship-driven, period. But agriculture in the U.S. is particularly that way. And there's a sort of a rich history of neighbors speaking to one another. What's working for you? What's not? That's a person you can trust. This is a person you can't trust. Those sort of things. And so I'll give an example of that. When Katie, a few years ago, said she had an opportunity to collect some satellite imagery over vineyards in Southern California, where I'm from, she asked me, do you have anybody who would let me come and collect some tissue samples for these diseases, which are quite sensitive, by the way. Like if you have this disease, it's really private and delicate information. Do you have anybody who would let me come and take some of these tissue samples and so that I can coordinate flights? And I said, probably. Texted a couple of friends, and within 20 minutes, the winemaker at a winery where my dad started working in the late 70s, where I had my wedding rehearsal dinner, things like that, was like, yeah, no problem. No more questions were needed to be asked because he trusts me. And he knows that I'm not going to bring somebody to his vineyard who's going to be there to do something bad, right? And so then he effectively becomes an ambassador for our work into that community as well, right? And so we actually, in Acres, NASA Acres, we just launched a program called FIAT, which is the Farm Innovation Ambassador Team, which is kind of built around that principle. These are high-touch relationships between a researcher and a farmer or rancher on their farm or ranch. And we work with them. These are people who are comfortable seeing the proverbial sausage get made. Things take their time. There are mistakes. Things aren't great always at the very beginning. And we can't guarantee that there will be results, but we can guarantee that we will show up. That's like our principle, and we'll keep plugging away as long as they're interested. And so the A in FIAT is ambassador, and the T is for team, right? So we're trying to work together and build the trust in this community. They're both representing their community's needs to us, and they're representing us and what we've done out to their community to help us scale the activities. So I think that even though it doesn't sound great to take your time, I think the true difference between a great idea and a great idea that's actually successful and sustained is finding your champion who helps co-develop the system, the real solution that they and their neighbors have been puzzling over for a very long time. And I'll give one more comment on that, which is, we do things very differently in NASA Acres. As I mentioned, I'm a professor. It's actually why I'm here, able to be here. I am not affected by the shutdown because I have a cooperative agreement with NASA as opposed to being an employee. And so one of the key things about that is I can create partnerships in very unique ways that NASA cannot. And I can create interesting business models. And so an example is we work with farmers and say, what would it be worth to you to participate in this activity? Sometimes they see risk, or sometimes they don't see the value of their time. If you're going to share some of the profits from the business or pay them an honorarium for their time, buy their data, they're like overwhelmingly open to that. They just want to be considered as an important part of the process and not have something built off of their own back that maybe one day they have to buy the service for in the future.
Exactly, yeah. So that time that maybe at the time felt like going slow is actually what enabled you to go fast and to have a sustainable platform.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I see you vigorously nodding
Yeah,
over
yeah,
there. You want to comment?
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think as technologies, we share the principle that we need to act fast, right? And that really helps us to catch the pace for technology development. But I think for Agtech sector, we also need to think carefully. That's the reason we sometimes want to slow down the thinking process. We have a lot of a buzzword about AI technologies nowadays, right? From the research perspective, we can see hundreds, thousands of papers published on daily basis. And then from the business sector, we see a lot of startup companies just launched overnight. So that sometimes give us the pressure. Oh, am I kind of behind the schedule? But that's where for agriculture technology is a little bit different. As Alyssa mentioned, it's a long-term trust and relationship establishment. It's more like we need to act fast so that we can iterate our technology fast enough to just try to understand the needs and try to meet the needs from the growers. But at the same time, that will give us the time to gradually build the trust and help the growers being more engaged for this co-development process. Because otherwise, if we develop some technology that we can think, oh yeah, I'm gonna save millions of the farmers, and at the end of the day, most likely gonna be, oh, yeah, it's cool, but might not be that useful or helpful for my kind of farming management. So that's the reason it's very important for us to consider how to start build this relationship at the beginning while we act fast to catch the tech pace.
Absolutely. So, Gloria, I wonder if you want to take this kind of next element of the question. How do we start, right? Like, where is the starting place? Is it having just one conversation? Like, what is your thoughts there? Having watched you do it fairly recently.
Yeah, I think the way that I tend to consider it is sort of a snowball process. An example that Alyssa mentioned where you just talk to one person, and that person recommends you, that builds trust. Once you show up, and I show up authentically to the first person and ask the questions and make it very clear that, hey, I come, here is a piece of paper that says Cornell reviewed my research plan and they look for any ethical sort of concerns that could be addressed, and then we address them, and then now I'm talking to you because the university has approved it, I'm here and I'm talking to you, and I show up authentically and we can be able to have a conversation. By the end of the conversation, usually, I'm able to be like, okay, is there anyone else you think that would be a good person for me to talk to? And then they suggest someone else, and then it builds that process in that way. So then eventually, it feels like now there's a community that I'm able to talk to. And it just starts with one person, building that trust and earning their respect and being authentic when you show up to the farm. And don't show up with, again, the hammer looking for a nail with a solution, but mostly just show up to listen, so that will drive the problem definition.
Absolutely. I love that, showing up authentically. Yeah. So if we could kind of think about, like, when we're all in, right? We're all in. We've got our first conversation scheduled. We're going to the farm, right? Is there can we think of maybe, like, if we could make only one recommendation in terms of a good rule of thumb or a good practice for building trust? Can we think of a recommendation, or alternately, like, what is the thing we definitely want to avoid, something we've seen break trust more quickly than it could be repaired?
Yeah, so we have this thing that we call like building a trust infrastructure, so to speak, because the first part of trust is like setting up the relationship, right? And I can have my ethical principles and I can tell them what they are to high heaven. But ultimately, I need to be able to implement them. And there's two kind of main ways that we're able to do that. And one is sort of legal frameworks. And getting that kind of contractual thing in place, and I'll explain that a bit more in one. And then because we're talking about data, I work in the world of data. Then the other piece is actually setting up the computational frameworks and things like that are secure and are able to actually support the ethics that you've put forth and what you have in the legal contract. In terms of the legal contracts, they're about 11 years ago, as sort of digital agriculture was exploding, and there was a lot of data being produced and collected by machinery, especially on large farms. There was this thought of, well, who owns this data now? What's going to happen with this data? What's going to happen with what comes of the data in terms of new technology, or in our case, a high-resolution map that's a yield forecast? Like, what's going to happen with that? And so American Farm Bureau Federation, American soy, corn, potato, sorghum, any number of actors in the ag space came together and created an initiative called Ag Data Transparent, which the website is just that, agdatatransparent.org. And the idea was not to be prescriptive about what needs to, the rules that are set forth in the contract, but the idea was to define what a contract needs to look like, what it needs to include. And one of the core sort of principles within that is that the contracts should be simple and comprehensible. So it's great that these companies have these lawyers that are highly paid and can put together these beautiful contracts that protect the interests of the company. But farmers typically don't have those like people available to them to review their contracts. And so the idea is you should have these short, readable contracts. There should be an education component with it to explain what's in it. But then there's also things about, your ability to opt out, delete your data if you no longer want to be, part of the system and things like that. So I think that is a very practical and an important thing to show up with and say, look, I can tell you who I am and I can tell you what I intend to do, but both for your benefit and also honestly for mine, because it happened to me earlier in my career that I was saying something I thought was true about what would happen with the data, and then it turned out my university had a different policy. And I was like, oh no, I've effectively lied, not wanting to, right? So it protects also me and making sure that as a collaborator, I am within the rules of what my legal institution can defend. So I think that that's worth looking. And the last comment about ADT is if you do have like a data use agreement that you set up, they will audit it. They will audit your agreement, and like you get like a sort of seal of approval that says like, no, this is compliant with what these farmer interest groups have said is really quite important to them and their constituents.
Yeah, I think that's basically we need to be respectful, right? That's from the data perspective, from the contract perspective, but also that's from the technology perspective. I think we need to promise less, but do more. So my first PhD student graduated last year, and I just received a phone call last night that some of the vineyard manager shared, yeah, your students launched this startup and they just worked there overnight to try to deploy the robots, to really get the disease map for us. So that's the thing I think the growers will recognize. And that's very important aspect for the growers to start trust these technologies. It's not like I'm gonna just show up for a second and really share of you many of the advantages AI can bring, but who knows when and how that's gonna impact their daily management practices. And farming is a really complex business in my opinion. It's not only about the field work to manage these plants, but they also are part of the business sector. They are part of the marketing sector. They need to handle millions of different tasks. So it's very important for you to show consistency to them so they can rely on you and start to build a trust for long term.
Absolutely. Glar, I'd love your thoughts here before we switch to the Q&A.
Yeah, of course. So one way that I try to think about it is from what we call the least privilege principle in computer science and computer security in particular. That is to think about when you're collecting data and you're sharing data and you're processing data about farms and as you're building in your product. I spent some time, actually nearly a year at a startup, a space startup that was also trying to build agricultural products. And there, I had to, on a day-to-day basis, I had to look at maps of particular farms and try to build a product out of it. So the least privilege principle states that I have to make sure everyone on my team, as when I was the head of engineering, they can only access the data they need to do their jobs. Because ultimately, to be able to build trust with the growers also is important for them to know when we're stewarding their data that only the people who need to access it can be able to do so. And that was important because ultimately we had to pivot away from the product because again, code development is important. But that taught me that, yeah, we need to maintain that principle of least privilege when it comes to dealing with farmers' data. Yeah.
Interestingly, just as an aside, so that ADT, Ag Data Transparent thing I mentioned, so within Acres, that was part of the foundation of the program, was adapting those because those were sort of business-to-business relationships, and it's like, well, what happens when you have publicly available data and public-funded science? Like, kind of had to approach that from a unique angle. But regardless, one of the principles that's in there aligns with that very closely, and it just occurred to me, which is the clear identity of the collaborator. So that's one of the things that shows up in the contract is like who actually truly is going to have access to the data. Is it the entirety of the organization, if it's a really large organization, or is it the small part of this company, or just the folks that I'm working with and people under their immediate supervision? And I think that transparency just goes a very long way. I think all of us in our lives just want somebody to be honest with you, and then you're willing to kind of go to the end of the earth to work toward the solution that you need.
Absolutely. So now I think we'd like to take a question from the audience, if there's any. I think there's some microphones in the front.
Oh, there's these little things you walk up to.
Yeah.
No questions for us.
Don't
We've
be
covered
shy now.
everything.
Don't be
yeah.
shy.
Oh, here we
Yeah.
go. Hi.
First one. Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
I'll start us off here. So thank you all for the session. This was really insightful. There are a few things that I heard that I kind of wanted to follow up on. You talked a lot about data, showing up authentically, trust in agriculture. I'm curious what you see the top risks are for AI in ag. Is it data, or are there other things you're concerned about?
Good question. Who's going to take that one first?
I just did the last talking, so it can't be me.
I can take that stab at it, and maybe you, if you have some thoughts. I think I will go back to the same issue of a sort of hammer looking for a nail, and that can also happen very easily with AI when it comes to models. Like, I'm afraid one of the risks is just you try to use a large language model for the problem that it was not built to solve. And that's one of the core risks. So being able to understand the input and output of what you want, and then building the right models. Because sometimes simple statistics can do the job that you need to do. You do not need a large language model to do so. And otherwise, it would just be, the concern with AI is you can move fast, very fast, into the wrong direction. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, as a researcher and also technologist, I'm not so worried about the technology itself. I believe engineers, computer scientists will work around to figure out the technology, especially for AI, that's gonna be beneficial for the farmers and the farming community. But I think the true risk there is that technology just grows so fast. And whether or not, when we look back for the farming community, we have accordingly prepared for education, for workforce development, to help the farmers be prepared to embrace these new AI tools on their daily basis, right? I'm not sure how many of you use AI assistant nowadays to help manage your schedule, to help reply your emails, right? That totally changed our life on a daily basis. But similarly, if we're gonna envision AI-based technologies to help the farming community, then what does that mean to farmers nowadays? Especially we have a lot of aged farmers, and we also want to attract the younger farmers back to the ag sector. What those mean, and are we prepared to have right programs to kind of be prepared for those changes? And I think that's the biggest risk we want to consider boldly.
I think for me, one of my biggest concerns is just simply quality. And I think AI often messages to a lot of people, or when we think about high-tech solutions, that this is like the absolute right answer. And there's kind of multiple sources of error in every type of data collection. My soapbox is that I don't like the term ground truth, because even the measurements you take on the ground have error in them, right? We take those measurements, and that's sort of what trains the AI model. And if the model, for example, has never seen a tornado in this state, it's not going to do a very good job of either predicting what the outcome of the tornado is going to be on the crop or whatever. And so what I'm trying to say is like, I worry about people looking at the output of an AI model and taking it as gospel, when in fact there does need to be quite a bit of human interpretation to make sense of the output, not to mention the design even making sense to the person, right? Like the 3-color threshold.
Absolutely. I think we'll have one more time from the audience if there's a... Oh, here we go.
A couple more, yeah.
Oh, great. Good morning.
morning.
Hi guys, my name is Bhuvesh Mehta. I'm the founder of One Venture Studio. We work at the intersection of corporate, food, agriculture, startups, and venture capital. My question to all three of you is, what's the problem statement right now that you're seeing which is most prone to disruption using AI? What comes to your mind, the low-hanging fruit which can be disrupted?
The industries in Agtech that are most disruptible.
Yep.
Is that the question?
Problem statements in Agtech, which...
Oh,
Yeah.
problem statements.
Like what's the most important thing to solve and what's
Yeah.
solvable?
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
great, yeah.
I think that's a great one. And I'm not sure if there are gonna be single answer for that. But in my opinion, usually that's where you want to kind of work with those extension networks. Just for many of you who might not be familiar with this term, so in the U.S. we have the extension system that we hire specialists that really connect the researchers and also serve for the stakeholders. In this case, will be the growers, so that they better understand what's the true problems in their daily operation, right? So in my opinion, if you attend these extension workshops, conferences, and you can get much better understanding about what's the general needs now facing to a particular region. Like for example, in New York State, we have a lot of unique challenges for robotic development. We have a super different, topology for our kind of a terrain and our soil. And many of the technologies developed in more flat, region like California or Washington might not directly, fit to our terrain. So in my opinion, it's more like, is the technologies really identifying all these challenges accurately in their problem statement rather than just a very general statement, I can solve like disease monitoring, for example. It's more like a tailored to their marketplace. I think that's very important to me.
I think, and it is a really important question because there is this twin of like, this is the major challenge we have to solve, and then there's like, this can't be solved, right? And constraining your question around AI specifically. So there's kind of two ways I would address this, and one is sort of thematically or in terms of the variables. Again, I'm coming from the farm side and ranch side. It's really like water management is sort of the issue of our time. And then I think also having disease, pest, weeds that are resistant to the sort of control mechanisms that we have available. And I think kind of generalizing some of the field trials that we have, AI can be incredibly useful. You pair the knowledge you have there with satellite data, and I think that that's kind of plugging away until you find the signal within the noise, I think is critical. But then on like sort of the big picture, I think it ties closely to what I just said before, which is resolving uncertainty. So really clearly what a thing that you're seeing means and how sure you are that it's going to happen. So scenarioing tools are incredibly important, and those are effectively models that, machine learning and AI models of saying, if I take this management intervention, what do I expect to happen to my yield? My yield stability. If there's an extreme weather event, am I more likely to weather it and not lose my crop? What's going to happen to the cost of these other inputs, my machinery wear and tear? What's going to happen to my competitors nearby, my soil carbon, my net emissions? Like these sort of complex models that can reveal multiple variables that are influenceable based on management decisions, and those which are not particularly influenceable when Mother Earth decides to do its own thing.
Yeah. So you want to?
Yeah, I think, so coming at it from an infrastructure perspective, I work on especially infrastructure for AI. And I did my PhD on thinking about like how do you deploy AI workloads to edge compute nodes, like in farms in this case. And for any solution you hear about, AI-powered X or AI-powered X for agriculture, or try to question what does the infrastructure look like? Because it doesn't matter that you have a great AI model that's located in a cloud, but you're trying to deploy it to a farmer who's in a rural area with limited connectivity. It's 95% of AI projects I've heard right now are not working out. It's because there's that disconnect. So if anybody tells you there's an AI-powered X, you have to ask, like, what does the infrastructure look like? What are you going to run into as problems there? And question those. That's where, when you tune those knobs, you start to get a little more realistic answer of what the real problems versus which ones are not tractable.
Yeah.
Thank you. Love the answers. I'll bother you after the panel.
Okay, for sure, yeah.
So I'd love to share my thoughts there and take my privileges as moderator to do so before we close out.
There's one more. But
There's one more. Oh my, I didn't see you. You're on the other side of the podium. I'd just like to share those thoughts there quickly, because now the timer screen is starting to blink at us. Oh my.
Yeah.
So I personally deeply believe that ag and food tech has the capacity to improve quality of life. And ultimately, I believe that AI and all the transformative technologies that we are learning about here today have that potential inherently when we hold that human value, that human center, It fundamentally changed my trajectory as a graduate student, learning about the importance of societal sustainability in the environmental and financial sustainability conversation. Ultimately, agriculture and positions in agriculture have some of the highest rates of suicide of any profession in the nation. And I really deeply believe that Agtech has the potential to help improve that in many different ways and elements. And that's ultimately one of the driving theses here, is that when you center the people that will ultimately be using your technology and center this principle of co-development, you can make something that's wildly successful and wildly helpful for society.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm sorry, come find us afterwards. We're getting caned off the stage.
Yeah.
So thank you all so much for this platform to speak today, and thank you for joining us. We're grateful and looking forward to being around the next 2 days, so come find us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.